Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Review Den. Last time we looked into the history, background, and overall qualities of the original Wipeout, and it was all tremendously fun, so be sure to check that out if you want to catch up. But for now, we are moving on, so join me today as we look at Wipeout 2. 2097. XL. The next one. Now, the original Wipeout was an impressive game, but like the rest of the PlayStation 1's launch lineup, it tends to be overlooked because of just how quickly the PlayStation's game catalog improved in quality. The colorful but clunky 3D graphics were quickly replaced by refined geometry and texture work, and most importantly, they had the gameplay to match. Seriously, I know console lifespans and development cycles were shorter in those days, but it is crazy how quickly Sony went from quirky launch games to absolute classics. And Wipeout 2097 is the perfect representation of that. The key elements might be similar to before, but the game improves on every single one of them, from gameplay to presentation, and all of this happened in 1 year. Like the first game, 2097 is a high-speed, anti-gravity racer with an emphasis on track memorization and some combat. As was common with the first generation of Wipeout games, the cornering is quite floaty, so practice and reaction time is key. The developers didn't want a standard racing game with a sci-fi coat of paint. They wanted a believable anti-gravity experience, and you'll feel it in the earlier titles. However, the physics and controls are much more responsive here. The first Wipeout had very heavy controls, and the ships were easy to destabilize. Here, the craft respond quickly, and most importantly, they don't crash and bounce around wildly at the slightest mistake. Oh, you'll lose speed when you bump the wall, but that's it. You won't get caught on geometry or start scraping the ground constantly. Everything's much more stable while still giving the feel of a hovercraft, if that makes sense. In fact, if you scrape a wall at a shallow enough angle, you'll do just that. Scrape along the wall rather than losing any speed. It's only for the most gentle collisions you can't wall ride like Burnout, but it's nice that the collision modeling was completely overhauled. If you hated losing all your momentum back in the first game, yeah, this is much better. Weapons and combat return, and these two are improved across the board. The original set of power-ups are all present, with several getting nice upgrades. Unguided rockets now fire a spread of 3 shots, while guided missiles can be fired backwards at annoying pursuers. Better yet, there are some nasty new additions, such as the Super Bomb, which hits everyone in range, the Quake, which ribbons up the entire track in front of you, and the Electrobolt, which can destroy opponents in a single shot. And yes, I said destroy. Both you and the AI have limited health now, so if you take too many hits or smash too many walls, that craft is done. Thankfully, you can recharge by driving through the pit lane or getting lucky with an energy power-up. The developers wanted to add a Formula 1 element to the game where you had to manage the damage you took, and it's a pretty neat idea, even if F-Zero did it first. Now, all of these improvements make for a much better playing game, of that there is no doubt. But if you're thinking this is going to be a cakewalk, oh boy, you're in for a shock. To make up for the better handling, Psygnosis added faster and even more wild tracks than before. There are tons of sharp turns, and I guess you could say breaks in the later courses that will challenge even the best players, so the smoother physics don't mean you get an easy time. The good news, though, is that the challenge feels more fair this time. Yeah, you'll reach some insane speeds and the tracks are tough, but you're actually given an easier speed level to start out with, and the game introduces the autopilot power-up, which not only boosts your speed, but will automatically fly the craft for a few precious seconds. It's not a game breaker. If you constantly hit the walls, a few autopilots won't save you, and the system has a nasty habit of dumping you right before a turn, unless you cancel out manually, but it can save your bacon in a tight race, or if you need to make up for lost time. Make no mistake though, Wipeout 2097 is a crazy hard game until you memorize the tracks. It's a game that will kick your butt when you first try the abandoned subway or spaceport or the collapsed city, but if you stick with it and keep on restarting and practicing, you'll look back and be amazed how second nature it all becomes. 2097 includes a nice amount of content, lightly expanded over the original. There are 8 tracks and 5 craft this time out, but it's the way you unlock them that is pretty cool. Rather than dumping players into a championship without any chance for practice, you start by clearing each track individually. The first 6 are available right away, and they're arranged in ascending speed classes, 2 on easy, 2 on medium, and so on. Now you'll need a first place gold to clear them, but again, it's not a championship. You can just keep on trying until you succeed. Only when you master all 6 do you unlock the proper championship. It's a great system. It forces players to learn each track individually, then presents them in a series, rather than locking away the harder races where you can't really practice them. The first championship presents all 6 tracks at the hard speed level, and you'll have to win each one to proceed, but if you get a second or third place, you can try again for free. Win here to unlock the last 2 tracks and Phantom class, the fastest speed class in the game. I'm not gonna lie, these are a hardcore test of skills, but again, you have the chance to practice them individually before moving on to the final championship. Here, you'll have to win all 8 tracks in series at the Phantom speed level, but doing so will grant you the final reward, the Piranha. This craft can't use weapons, but has maxed out stats, which admittedly make it pretty fun at slower speed levels to just dominate the AI. Like the first game, getting the last unlock can be a Herculean effort, but the game gives you most of the content off the bat, and there are codes if it's all too much for any players. Okay, can't put it off any longer. Wipeout 2097 is an awesome looking and sounding game. As I mentioned, developers came to grips very quickly with the PlayStation hardware, and the results speak for themselves. Despite just a 7-month development cycle, 2097's presentation is leaps above its predecessor. Polygon count is way up, eliminating rough edges and pop-in, texture work is more detailed and less warpy, and the game runs a smooth 30 frames per second on PlayStation. There's a greater range in lighting and colors, and the ships all leave that cool blue engine trail. More than any technical chops, though, the game looks great from a design point of view. Psygnosis worked with Designers Republic in the original game, and it had some great advertising, signage, and ships to show for it, but the tracks themselves could be a bit generic. This time, Wipeout looks like it takes place in a proper living world. There are underground factories, Tibetan mountains, dense Chilean jungles, and several cityscapes ranging from bright metropolises to rundown metros and spaceports. It's all more dense and lived in. The developers really fill the screen with the world of Wipeout. The only downside to all of this, and this is more of a modern tech issue rather than the game, is that the game can come across very dark on modern flat screens. The tunnels and later cityscapes make use of some crazy lighting effects between light and shadow, and while this probably looked great on tube TVs and monitors, modern screens tend to suffer from black crush, where anything below a certain light level just shows up as black. It makes for vivid images, but for Wipeout 2097, I had to crank the brightness up to see anything on these tracks. Apologies for any odd gamma issues, but I like for everything to show up well. 2097 rocks on the audio front as well. The first game took huge influence from underground British electronica of the time, and the same goes here, just even better. Tim Wright's Cold Storage covers the Saturn and PC ports nicely, while the PS1 gets some killer licensed music from Prodigy, Fluke, Chemical Brothers, and Future Sound of London. Whether it was Gran Turismo, Twisted Metal, or Wipeout, Sony made great use of their music label for their video games, and this was long before Electronic Arts made it mainstream. Sound effects are subtle but effective, with the robotic weapons announcer making a great comeback. Awesome! So where can we play it? Well, just like the first title, Wipeout 2097 was developed primarily for the PlayStation 1, but received Sega Saturn and home computer ports as well. The PlayStation version looks and runs great, and gets the added bonus of the licensed soundtrack. The DualShock analog sticks still aren't supported, but it does work with the twisty Nijicon for the few that have it. Most everyone will play it with the regular D-pad though, and it works fantastic, so no worries. As a quirky side note, the PlayStation version is the only version with the Red Bull advertising. Hey Fox, you thirsty? The Sega Saturn port is unfortunately pretty bad this time out. I mentioned that the first game looked and ran a bit worse on Saturn, but only by a little, and was still a great playing game. 2097 though is just rough. The textures and transparencies look nasty, but the biggest offender is the performance. This port runs so choppy it actually makes it hard to play. And even though it supports the 3D analog stick, the controls and performance are so sluggish that it really makes little difference. If anything, it actually slows down your response time. The first Wipeout made a nice showing on the Saturn, but for 2097, you'd probably want to play this somewhere else. And the home computer ports make a really cool showing here. Not only does the game support joysticks and 3D acceleration right out of the box, but the title dropped on not one, but 3 different OSs. A Windows 95 port was available for PC users and a Mac OS version for Apple fans, but get this, an official Amiga port released in 1999. Now, this wasn't for the garden-level Amiga 500s you're probably thinking of. This was only really playable on the last few PowerPC-based Amiga desktops, but it shows just how popular this game was, and how dedicated the Amiga fanbase was and still is. Now, the home computer ports all exist in a time that unfortunately requires a pretty specific combination of hardware and software to run properly. You'll need to go digging to get these 32-bit games working right today, but it's nice that Wipeout was given some proper PC love here. Later games in the series would sadly never be so lucky. However you play it, Wipeout 2097 is a landmark racing game. It routinely shows up in many top 100 or so best games of all time, and it's easy to see why. Individually, any of the improvements in sound, graphics, or gameplay over the original would make for a great game, but together they created the perfect storm to make one of the PlayStation's legendary titles. It pushed gamers and hardware further than anyone thought possible, and if you have any interest in speed, style, or challenge, Wipeout 2097 is a worthy retro legend. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and if you'd like to help a small channel grow, would you be my next subscriber? I'll be back next time with another review, and in the meantime, be sure to keep going, because you are worth it.